Science is a force for good in our world. Science could do amazing things in life, but sometimes it has to experiment. And an experiment can go badly, really badly, that turned into a disaster. Welcome to History Bazaar. Today we're talking about some science experiments that turned into disasters. But first, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. In the early 1930s, comparative psychologist Winthrop Kellogg and his wife welcomed a healthy baby boy they named Donald. The psychologist had grown interested in those stories of children who were raised feral, but he didn't send Donald to be raised by wolves. He did the opposite. He managed to get his hands on a similar-age baby chimp named Gua and raised her alongside Donald. Gua initially did better than Donald in tests that included things like memory, scribbling, strength, dexterity, reflexes, problem-solving, climbing, and more. But she eventually plateaued, and it became evident that no amount of equal treatment was going to make her behave more like a human. But when the Kelloggs ended the experiment, they did so abruptly and without much explanation, which is contrary to the meticulous records they otherwise took throughout the course of the study. While Gua wasn't showing any signs of picking up English, Donald had started to imitate the vocalizations of his sister from another species, so it's not hard to speculate why the Kelloggs called it quits. You may have heard about the Stanford prison experiment, a social psychology study gone awry in 1971. Lead researcher Philip Zimbardo had predicted that situations and circumstances dictate how a person acts, not their personality. To start, 24 young men were assigned the roles of prison guards or prison inmates, with some held back as alternates. Each was paid $15 per day for his participation in the study, which was supposed to last 2 weeks. The prisoners were arrested, taken to a fake prison in the basement of a school building, then made to wear a dress-like prison uniform with chains around their right ankle. By the second day, the Fox prisoners had revolted. Over the next few days, some of the prisoners were so traumatized that they were pulled out. The experiment was disbanded on day 6 after an outside observer witnessed the upsetting events taking place and sounded the alarm. Modern-day researchers don't believe the experiment can be replicated because it doesn't meet today's research ethics standards. After all, it's hard to give fully informed consent when there's no way to predict how events could unfold. Zimbardo, however, has defended his results and stated that these criticisms are misrepresenting his study and the experiences of the people in it. If there's anything to be said for Franz Reichelt, it's that he had supreme confidence in his own invention. In the early 1900s, Reichelt crafted a parachute from 320 square feet of fabric, all of which folded up into a wearable aviator suit. He had conducted several parachute tests using dummies, which all failed. He pinned the blame on the buildings, saying that they simply weren't tall enough. In 1912, Reichelt planned to test his latest version by flinging a dummy from the Eiffel Tower. But when he arrived at the famous landmark, the inventor surprised the waiting crowd by strapping on the parachute himself and taking the leap. The parachute didn't open, however, and Reichelt became a victim of his own invention. An autopsy report determined that he had died of a heart attack on the way down. In 1974, the Cleveland Indians tinkered with a new promotion to increase game attendance, giving fans the opportunity to purchase an unlimited amount of beer for 10 cents a cup, which wasn't the best idea. The game against the Texas Rangers was an eventful one. Memorable events of the evening included a woman running onto the Indians' on-deck circle and flashing the umpire, and a father and son who ran onto the outfield and mooned the bleacher section. Things took a violent turn when fans launched fireworks into the Rangers' dugout, and the whole thing eventually turned into an all-out riot, with fans against players on both teams. Players were hit with folding chairs. There were numerous fistfights, and some players were injured when they were pelted with rocks. After that, the Cleveland Indians kept 10-cent beer nights, but limited the promotion to 2 drinks per person. In the early 90s, 8 scientists sealed themselves into a 3.14-acre structure in Arizona. The highly publicized $200 million experiment was known as Biosphere 2, and according to one of the scientists involved, its goals included education, eco-technology development, and learning how well our eco-laboratory worked. But the scientists ran into a number of problems that required outside interference in order to continue the experiment, including a lack of sunlight that affected crops, an injured crew member who had to temporarily leave for treatment, and insufficient oxygen. In recent years, however, the success of Biosphere 2 has been reevaluated, with some scientists believing that the base message that humans can live in harmony with our biosphere was a win in and of itself. And even if the vast investment was viewed as a mistake, the underlying idea remains solid. Similar experiments have been recently conducted to see if we can sustain life on Mars. It's probably safe to say that an experiment falls into the gone wrong category when it may have been responsible for producing the Unabomber. As an undergrad at Harvard in the late 1950s and early 60s, Ted Kaczynski participated in a 3-year-long study run by Henry A. Murray that explored the effects of stress on the human psyche. After being asked to submit an essay about their worldview and personal philosophies, Kaczynski and 21 other students were interrogated under bright lights, wired to electrodes, and completely torn down for their beliefs. The techniques were intended to break enemy agents during the Cold War, and the students were never completely informed about the nature of the study. Kaczynski later described this as the worst experience of his life. Still, we can't assume the study was solely responsible for sending him down the destructive and murderous path he eventually followed. But at the very least, the study is now considered highly unethical and likely wouldn't pass current ethics standards for research. Psychoanalyst Wilhelm Reich managed to draw a straight line from human orgasms to the weather to an alien invasion. Influenced by Sigmund Freud's work on the human libido, Reich extended the concept to propose a kind of widespread energy he called orgon. To give you an idea how scientifically sound Reich's concept was, orgon has been compared to the Force in Star Wars. As bizarre as this all sounds, Reich went even further in the late 1950s when he became convinced that aliens were spraying the Earth with a specific type of radiation to prevent us from using this powerful energy. In order to save the world, he and his son built cloudbusters, a row of tubes attached to hoses immersed in water and aimed at the sky. The water, they believed, would absorb the radiation. Did the experiment work? We don't know for sure, but the FDA didn't think so. They ordered Reich's various machines and apparatus destroyed, and they had him jailed for trying to smuggle them out of the state. April 23, 1985 was a day that will live in marketing infamy. And that's how Coke describes the failed experiment that was New Coke. On that day, the Coca-Cola Company debuted a new version of their popular soft drink made from a new and supposedly improved formula. It was the first major change to the product in nearly a century, and it was one that was supported by overwhelmingly positive reviews in taste tests and focus groups. But once New Coke actually hit the shelves, fans were absolutely outraged. While the taste test accounted for the actual flavor of the new formula, they couldn't account for the emotional ties consumers had to the brand history. Fans started hoarding old Coke, and complaints poured in to the tune of 1,500 calls a day. CEO Roberto Goizueta even received a letter addressed to Chief Dodo, the Coca-Cola Company. The message was received loud and clear. Coke announced the return of Old Coke in July, dubbing it Coca-Cola Classic, and they never experimented with the formula again. Or if they did, they kept it to themselves, and were none the wiser. We hope you enjoyed another episode of History Bazaar. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the fastest growing history channel on YouTube.